What do you think makes one podcast super popular while another one gets totally overlooked? Well, it's not the gear or the budget, it's you. Your personality is what keeps listeners coming back for more. So today, I'm going to explore how you can turn your podcast into a show people cannot stop listening to.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here. I truly do mean that so much. Thank you very much. I am Chris, and this is Podtastic Audio. You know, this show right here, I designed it and I created it to help you, the indie podcaster you, make an amazing show for your audience. And one amazing tool to help you make that happen is Riverside.fm. Today's episode is brought to you by Riverside, the platform that helps me create a podcast that you'll actually like. Let's face it, being liked as a podcaster isn't about fancy gimmicks. It's about connection, quality, and making your audience feel like they're right there with you. And that's where Riverside.fm comes in. It lets you record studio quality audio and video no matter where you are or where your guest is at. So you sound and look your best every single time. And with their AI-enhanced one-click video editor, this takes the stress out of editing. Trust me, we all get stressed over editing. This handles all that stuff, including removing silences, add some captions, and makes these cool shareable magic clips that help you connect with your audience on social media. And the magic editor, perfect for fine-tuning those conversations so every word lands just right. If you want your podcast to stand out and truly resonate, Riverside is your secret weapon. You can try it now for free, and when you're ready to upgrade, use my exclusive promo code Podtastic for 15% off any paid plan. With Riverside, you don't just create podcasts, you create something people will love. So on this podcast right here, and also the other one a little bit, I never really like to talk about myself in kind of a positive way, kind of a bragging way. Like, look what I did. Look at the cool things that I can do. Look at the awards that I got. I don't like to say that too often because I feel that, well, it kind of doesn't really help you much at all. But for the purposes of today's episode, I'm going to dive into a little bit of that today, only because it came up and it gave me a brilliant idea for an episode, which we're going to cover right now. But first things first, thank you for all the kind words you have said on social media, all the amazing posts I've seen, all the amazing replies to my posts I've seen. You know, I make this episode for you. I make these podcast episodes for you so you can make an amazing show for your audience. And I think that recently when I did hear that I was chosen as someone's favorite podcast, I was like blown away that somebody actually thought of me. And the reason why they thought of me as their favorite podcast was because of my personality and the way I present myself on the microphone, how I use authenticity as my secret weapon, how I don't try to, I don't know, how do I say this, kind of sound too corporate like some of the other shows do. Like some of the other podcasters, especially ones about podcasting, they sound very like buttoned up. You almost can hear the tie strangling their neck as they're speaking. That's the way I feel when I hear these other shows. And I feel that this show right here, Podtastic Audio, is a complete opposite, breath of fresh air compared to this other stuffy, buttoned up podcast about podcasting. So it got me thinking that what is it about me and my personality on the microphone that you resonate with? What is it about me and my show that people seem to love, gravitate towards, and say it's their absolute favorite podcast? And it goes beyond just the podcasting here right now. Also, I realize this at work, at my regular day job. While I'm there, almost every other coworker I run into wants to have a conversation with me. I must have this like likability factor. One coworker wants to talk about the NFL playoff games. He's mentioned it to me like 5 different times. Every time I go by him, he says, "Hey, I got to talk about the game again." I said, "Great, let's talk about it." Another coworker wants to talk to me about finances and planning and money and markets and things like that. Great, we'll talk about that stuff. Another coworker wants to talk about work, of course. Another coworker wants to talk about housing market in San Diego, how to buy their first house. I talk to them about all the steps involved, what you need to do, how's it going. I'm very, very friendly. And I think this also rubs off with the customers that I deal with on a regular basis. And they're always willing to talk to me, shoot up a conversation. I'm always very friendly and very approachable. And even in the real world, outside the podcasting world. So what you hear on the podcast right here is exactly how I am outside the podcast, at my job, in my life, at home, everywhere I go. I think part of it is because I want to spread kindness and I want to be approachable and just spread joy. There's so much negativity in the world. There's so many people are having bad days all the time. And so if I can bring them some kind of joy and happiness with a smile and a small conversation, it makes me likable and approachable. And that's why so many people I encounter always want to have a conversation with me. And that's amazing. I love it. And so that's why this podcast here, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just trying to show you this is me in real life. This is exactly how I am on the podcast and in the real world. I'm exactly the same. And I try to bring positive energy everywhere I go. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, Chris, I get that. That's great. But what does that got to do with podcasting? Well, if the listeners actually like you, if you have a very high likability score, we'll call it that, then there's a chance that they're going to stick around and listen to your podcast, subscribe to your podcast, and maybe someday they'll say that your podcast is their favorite podcast. Now, we all know that content is king, but is it really? If content is king, then great connection with a host has got to be queen. More like very sexy, super hot queen. Because people will come to your show for the content, yes. Something they're interested in, yes. They'll press play on that one thing, yes. But they will stay around and subscribe because they like you and your personality. Now, one great thing about having an amazing personality is that a listener will often choose a podcast because they like the host, not just because of the topic. And being an indie podcaster like you and me, we have a major advantage because us indie shows can connect with our audience on a more personal level, a more authentic level than those big shows could ever do. And this adds some serious value for you as the podcaster because personality will foster loyalty and turning occasional listeners into those dedicated fans. And a really cool benefit for us indie podcasters is that your authenticity and relatability can help your podcast thrive without needing a big budget or even that celebrity status. Now, being likable isn't just about podcasting. You've probably seen this too in the job market. If you're going to get a job and you're going against somebody else who has the exact same skills that you do for the exact same position, which one do they hire? Which of the two? You may say, well, I've got all these great credentials on my resume and I've been all these places and I've done all these great things. I've got tons of experience. Well, maybe the other person has the exact same type of resume. So what do? It all comes down to likability. And I know that a lot of people out there swear they're like, you know what, we only hire people that are best suited for our job. Well, what it really comes down to is who do you like better than the other person, which can totally suck because what if one candidate is like really good for that position? They would do skyrocket over everybody else and be the best employee they ever had. But unfortunately, and I know that is not how the real world actually works. You see, beyond the technical capabilities of the employee or the potential employee, people want to look at those who are approachable, easy to talk to, and most importantly, trustworthy. Because if you're going to do business with somebody, you're usually going to do business with somebody you know, like, and trust. And the key word is also like. Likability gives you an edge in relationships, whether you're trying to land a job, grow a network, or build your podcast audience. If your audience likes you and likes your show, well, there's a really strong chance they're going to subscribe. And if they're subscribed to your show, there's a really high chance they're going to actually listen to your podcast. There is great power in having authenticity in podcasting, especially in your podcast. That's one of my main goals for 2025 here is, if I have not been already, is to be more authentic than I already am. And I think there's great value of being authentic and relatable to connect with your listeners. And I think that's why I kind of stopped listening to some of those celebrity style podcasts. I know when people say you got a podcast or you listen to podcasts, one of the things that always seems to pop up is those that listen to those big name celebrity shows. Even if they're not like a TV celebrity, maybe they're like a famous author or a famous speaker or something like that. But what got me about those podcasts is that I felt like they were never relatable to me. The things they were saying, the trips they were going on, the places they were doing, all that great stuff, all the money they had, it never felt like it spoke to me. It never felt like it related to me personally. The things they talk about, the struggles they have, had nothing to do with me. And so I kind of stopped listening to those shows. And I started listening to shows that I felt a deeper connection with the host and the things that they are going through and the things that they talk about. And that's why I try to be very relatable to you. And I try to show you that, hey, I'm just an indie podcaster just like you. I'm not on some big high mountain speaking, to all you little podcasting peasants down there. No, that's not me at all. That's not how I do this show. I come in here with you in the trenches, working together, showing you my real authentic self directly to you. I cannot get any more authentic than I already am. And authenticity is better than perfection. So you have this podcast that is completely polished and completely perfect end to end. They don't say a single they is like a robot, going at it with perfect, data, just reading script, data and facts and data and give me the facts and all that great stuff, versus one that is authentic and real. The authentic and real podcast, the listener will probably tune into more often than the data and facts, because you get data and facts pretty much anywhere. They want to connect with a podcaster that's actually real and actually relatable, because it's hard to relate to a robot, a sterile robot podcast, somebody that's really stuffy and buttoned up, has no sense of humor, has no personality. You can't connect with any of that stuff. And a podcast is an audio format that's very intimate. I'm talking like directly to you. We are hanging out, having a good time. I designed this show as if I'm having a conversation directly with you. Maybe you're talking back to me right now. Wait, what was that? Oh, we'll get to that later. Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate that. No, seriously though, like I'm having a conversation with you, and some of these podcasters, when they do their show, it doesn't feel like that at all. And that's been the goal of this show. And I'm working very hard this year to make sure that happens and that it feels as authentic as I possibly can make it. And the great benefit for you is that being authentic will build trust, make your listeners feel like they know you personally, and that's what keeps them coming back for more. I remember when I used to listen to all of the morning radio shows here in San Diego, and of course, I kind of gravitated towards my favorite show. A lot of them all kind of basically did the same thing. Even today, a lot of those morning shows, no matter what town you live in, all of those morning shows basically cover the same content. It's the gossip of the day. It's the entertainment news. It's the local news. It's maybe something hot going on in social media, or maybe your hot restaurant or something in the news. It's all kind of the same stuff. So if it's all the same stuff, why does one radio station do better than the other station in the same town at the same time? It's because that station has morning radio show DJs that people like and have personalities. And those are the morning shows that will share their personal lives and personal experiences and get as personal as they can, as authentic as they can with their listeners. And those are usually the shows that stick around longer. Now, being in radio, I know shows get canceled and moved around all of the time. I think in town here, there's probably like one or two shows that have lasted a fairly long time. The rest come and they go. And I don't know if it's because they can't compete or if that one show has already been so authentic, so real, and so relatable for so many years that having somebody else come in the market and try something completely new, that I think it's hard. It's a tough road. So you want to be the show that people come to for relatability, authenticity, and they actually like. So you want to have a very high likability of your podcast, which brings up the big giant elephant in the room. How do we get somebody to like us as an indie podcaster? How do we get this likability you speak of, Chris? Where does it come from and how do you make that happen? Well, guess what? Today you are in luck because I've got 4 key strategies to make sure to help you make that happen. Tip number 1, well, be yourself. Well, let me say that again. Be yourself. I know it doesn't sound very hard. Embrace in your unique quirks and personality. Now, I know some people get on the microphone and they just read a transcript word for word, end to end, and it sounds like you're reading. That's what it sounds like when you do it like that. So if you somehow can maybe branch off script a little bit and go into like some funny story or maybe kind of, do something that's a little, off script that doesn't sound so robotic and so scripted and planned out. So for example, if you got like this goofy laugh you always seem to do and people are like, man, your laugh is so goofy. Maybe lean into that because that goofy laugh that you think that is no good, people might actually like it and be like, wow, I dig that person because they got a goofy laugh. And I know sometimes if you're doing like an interview style show, laughter seems to come up more often because you guys are having a conversation going back and forth. And maybe you tell a joke or they tell a joke and you laugh or they laugh and it's a good old time. It's a little trickier to do on a solo show. Like I could tell myself a joke and I can laugh at it. It's kind of weird, but you get the point. So key number 1 is you want to make sure to be yourself. Now, moving on to tip number 2, and that is what I've been trying to do on this podcast and across all of my social media, is that you want to engage directly. That means that you want to interact with listeners via social media, emails, or comments to build personal connections. Now, what this means is that if you are on social media, do not just post new episode out. Episode 10 is out. Check it out. And that's it. You want to interact. You want to give your listeners a reason to interact with you and be more social on social media. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. So more than just posting new episode out, check it out. Give listeners a reason to follow you on social media. And that reason can't merely be, I'm stating the top 5, this and that. I'm doing this and I'm doing that. It's got to be more than that. You want to be a person behind the mic and behind the text and behind the social media account. There is a person. Let that personality of yours shine through within your social media. That's one comment that I got about my show, is that my social media is on fire. It is amazing. It is great because more than just, sharing podcasting tips and tricks, I share all kinds of cool stuff. And for me, I lean heavily into humor. So if things are funny, you better believe it, I'm posting it. If there was a trip I went to or a major sporting event I went to with a picture of me there, I am posting it. And it's not to brag and say, look where I went and all that great stuff. The reason why I do those things on social media is to give you an absolute full picture a full perspective of me, my personality, my authenticity, and to basically get you to like me as a podcaster and as a person too. And I'm being as real as I possibly can. And social media is a fantastic place to make that happen. Now, moving on to tip number 3, which is talk about what you love. I know it sounds like a no-brainer as an indie podcaster. Like, why would you talk about something you hate? Talk about what you love. You see, when you share your passions, your enthusiasm resonates with your audience. And that is how somebody gets to like you and your show. Can you imagine if you had to go on a podcast that you hated, or at least the content you absolutely hated? I know that for a hot minute when we were doing interviews on the Chris and Christine show, I would bring on a guest who I thought was somebody I wanted to hear from, but it turns out I really didn't. And so when they were doing the interview and I was listening to them talk, I was rolling my eyes in the back of my head, doing the gun pointed finger to the head, blow your brains out, bored out of your mind motion. Luckily, it wasn't on Zoom or on video. It was audio only. So the only person that saw me do that was Christine in the same room. And she would kind of like slap me and give me that look of like, pay attention. And I'm like bored to death because we were talking about something that I could care less about. And maybe partly had to do with the fact that the guest that was on telling that information didn't sound very convincing either. They sounded like they weren't really into it. Like they were just going through it because, well, maybe because that's what they did. You know, sometimes people start a podcast based around what they do for work. Like it's their job, it's their work, but it's not really their passion. So when they get on the microphone and they start talking about it, you really can tell that they're just going through the motions because it's all they know. It's all they've ever known because that's the only thing they've ever done. But it's not their passion. So try to talk about things that you like, because when you do, it sounds great and the listeners love hearing that. And the 4th thing you can do to get your podcast to be more likable by your listeners is that if you can, it's possible. I know that it's not for everybody, but maybe try to infuse some warmth and some humor to your podcast. Now, the reason why I said it's not for everybody is because what if you have like a true crime podcast or something along those lines? I don't know how much funsy times you're going to be having at like a murder scene podcast. So those shows, it all depends. It all depends on your show. It all depends on your personality. But if you want somebody to like you, actually like you, then you got to warm up to them. You got to make it inviting. You know, I think that is one thing that I have exceeded in with my personal life and with careers and jobs and just interacting with different people is the humor that I inject in almost everything I touch and do. And I can find the funny bits, I guess, in almost everything. And sometimes there's a place for that and sometimes there's not, especially when you are having a meeting with HR about a joke you said. No, that's never happened to me. Knock on wood. Not yet, but I don't try to be that crazy and that funny at work or inappropriately funny at work and things like that. But when it comes to your podcast, if you can try to be, real and give like the sense of humor that is a little off script, it's not so buttoned up, then I think podcast listeners will want to listen to your show over the other shows that are out there that are doing the exact same content that you are. What's great about likability is that what happens is that it transforms your audience into a loyal community that tunes in because they enjoy hearing from you and they like you. And with all of the millions or thousands or however many different podcasts that are out there today, people are going to listen to the shows they like. And not only are they liking the show itself, but most importantly, that they like you, the host, because one common denominator for your podcast is you. Whether you have guest interviews or co-host interview or however you do your podcast, because you can podcast however you want, whatever you want to do. It's your show. I get that. That's great. But you are the common denominator for your own podcast. So if an audience is coming to your show, chances are they're coming to the show because they like you. Just like you come to this show because you like me, right? You do like me, right? I'm just checking, making sure. All right, no worries. Hey, thanks again for listening all the way to the very end of this episode. I appreciate you so much. I make these shows for you, and I appreciate your support and your kind words. Oh my gosh, it means the world to me. And if you want to reach out to me, you can directly on my website. That is podtasticaudio.com. I've got links to all my social media. Every single episode is right there. And there's also a cool little contact me section where, guess what? Yeah, you can contact me directly right there. All at podtasticaudio.com. And you have an amazing week, and I will catch you on the next one. And until then, happy podcasting.